Hi, everybody. We'll start in a couple of minutes at 1 o'clock. Looking forward to seeing you all. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to It Says What, where JW3 and Limud come together to bring you unexpected and exciting Jewish content from across the Jewish community every week before Shabbat. I am Joe Hyman, JW3's young adult programmer. JW3 is the cross-communal Jewish Centre of Arts and Culture and Community in London. We are partnering to bring you this program with Limud, a diverse and inclusive community of Jewish learning. This series will ask educators and artists, leaders from across the Jewish community in the UK and abroad, as we have here today, to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. Each week, we'll post our beautiful source sheet on the screen for you to have a look at. And please feel free to ask questions to our rabbi today about whatever you're thinking about in terms of this text. And with no further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Jeremy Borovitz, the Director of Jewish Learning for Hillel in Germany and the co-founder of Base Berlin, a really exciting community in Berlin. Jeremy was raised in Paramus, New Jersey, the son of a Reform rabbi and a lawyer for the Jewish Theological Seminary. He got his BA in public policy from the University of Michigan, and with no better ideas for his future, he joined the Peace Corps. Jeremy received his smicha recently from Rabbi Daniel Landis in the Yashrut program in February 2020, and we're so delighted to have him with us today. Unfortunately, Jeremy's wife, Rebecca, the other half of the team at Base Berlin and Hillel Germany, was unable to be with us today, but they're very much a team, and we're glad to have you with us today. How are you, Jeremy?
Joe, thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here, and apologies on behalf of Rebecca. She was unable to make it, but she sent me here in spirit and told me not to embarrass her. So here I am. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'll also say I visited JW3 on a few occasions, and I've been to many Limuds, although not in the UK. It's really an honor to be a part of this amazing collaboration. So shkayach to all of you.
Thank you. Well, we hope to have you back in the UK at JW3 and Limud Festival, please God, soon. So tell us, what is the text that you've chosen that you feel is unexpected or poignant for this time?
So I have to say, this is a text I've been thinking about a lot. And I've been thinking about it actually for about 4 weeks, because for those of us who are on the Daf Yomi learning endeavor, this is a text that came up about 4 weeks ago in Daf Yomi. It's from the Talmudic tractate of Shabbat, Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, or 33b. It's really a fascinating text, and it's almost the perfect timing for so many reasons. First off, It's talking about a cave and emerging from a cave, and we'll get more into that in a second. And also it discusses Shimon Bar Yochai, who of course is the hero / inspiration for Lag BaOmer parties that will not be happening anywhere this year. But Lag BaOmer, which is happening on Monday night, is really the biggest party in the world, tended to happen in Meron at a cave in Israel. And we're going to learn more about that cave in a second. So I think I'll jump into the text. Does that sound good, Joe?
Perfect.
Amazing. So this is a text, and we'll scroll down here. I always believe in leaving the Aramaic or the Hebrew on the sheet, which is important, but we'll look at the English for now. And the Gemara was discussing different ideas prior to this, and it mentioned sort of casually, oh, and by the way, Rabbi Yehuda is described as the head of the speakers in every place. And the Gemara, as the Gemara loves to do, and as any good Jewish conversation goes, someone mentions something and it's like, oh, let's go on a little bit of an aside for an hour or two and discuss that topic, and then we'll come back to the topic at hand. So the Gemara asks why they called him the head of the speakers in every place, and it relates this amazing story. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon were sitting, and this other guy, Yehuda, son of converts, was sitting beside them, Yehuda ben Gerim. And Rabbi Yehuda opens up and he says, man, the Romans are amazing, okay? The Romans are so great. They built marketplaces. They built bridges. They built bathhouses. They are such an amazing group of people. And Rabbi Yossi is silent. His response to that is complete silence. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is like, everything the Romans do, they do for their own sake. That you think they're building these things for us? They're not building these things for us. They do it entirely for themselves. And actually, right here are three very Jewish responses to government in general. Okay, so on the one hand, you have the Jews who are like, oh, this government is amazing. I love this secular government, yada, yada, yada. There are Jews who are like, we just have to focus on our own interests, get through the day, do what we need to do. And there are Jews who are like, forget this government. It's terrible. They do it all for their own purposes. So already I love this text because it's talking about Jewish responses to a secular government. But it turns out that that's actually not where this story is going to go, because Yehuda, son of converts, he goes and he relates their statements to his household, which is also an amazing part of this text, because it's not the Yehuda, son of converts, who's going and telling the Romans. He's just like, man, he went home and he's like, I heard the most amazing conversation today. These three rabbis were arguing about the Romans. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they neutral? What do they mean? And he went and told it, and those statements continued to spread until they were heard by the monarchy. How often do we just whisper one thing and suddenly it blows up? But that's also not what we're going to talk about today. So the Romans find out, and they're so mad, and they're like, Yehuda, he loves us. So we're going to make Yehuda the head of the speakers in every place. Oh, that answered the Gemara's question from before. Yossi, he was silent, so we're going to exile him up to Tzipori, up to the Galilee, because what's going on in the Galilee? It's boring there. You want to be in the center. We're sending it off to the Galilee. And Shimon, who said bad things about the Romans, Shimon must be killed. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar, they go and they hide in the study hall. And at first, every day, Rabbi Shimon's wife was bringing them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. And then eventually, Rabbi Shimon is like, this is a bad idea. This isn't going to work. He says some things that are kind of offensive about women that will sort of move through. And he's like, we can't trust my wife to continue doing this. This is not a good idea. So let's go and hide in a cave. And they went and they hid in a cave. We're at the bottom of this sheet right here. They went and they hid in the cave, and they're hiding in a random cave. Today, the tradition says that this is the cave in Meron. This is the very same cave that like thousands upon thousands of Jews will dance around on most Lag BaOmers, but hopefully not this year. So they go and they hide in a cave, and a miracle occurred. And a carob tree, it was created for them, as well as a spring of water. Now, the carob tree is super rooted in Talmudic discourse. It's like this magical tree that gives us sustenance wherever we are, yada, yada, yada. And a spring of water, the Mayan Kamitz Gaber of Elazar ben Arak, it's the water of Torah, it's springing up. And so they would remove their clothes and sit covered in sand up to their necks. and they would study Torah all day in that manner. So they're sitting in this magic cave, they're eating carobs, they're drinking waters, they cover themselves in sand, and they're studying Torah. Now, according to legend, it was during this period that they actually wrote the Zohar. You know, Jewish tradition says that Shimon Bar Yochai writes the Zohar during this period of time. Academics might have a different answer as to when the Zohar is written. I'm not going to wade into that debate at the moment. So at the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves and pray, and then they would again remove their clothes so that they would not become tattered. And they sat in the cave for 12 years. Can you imagine 12 years sitting in a cave covered in sand, only even getting dressed for prayer, only eating carob trees and water? We think it's tough that we can't get all our ingredients in the supermarket. Oh no, they're low on kosher chicken. What are we gonna do? But like, can you imagine for 12 years eating carobs and water? And then Elijah the prophet comes by and he stands at the entrance to the cave and says, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor has died and his decree has been abrogated?" They emerged from the cave and they saw people were plowing and sowing, just work in their fields. And Shimon Bar Yochai said, "These people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance." And suddenly, every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, looked, everywhere they looked was immediately burned. They suddenly turned into Cyclops from the X-Men. They burned the world around them. And a divine voice emerges from heaven and says, "Did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave." They go back to the cave. They sit there for another 12 months. And after 12 months, they come out. And everywhere that Rabbi Elazar is looking, he's still burning. But everywhere that Rabbi Shimon looks, he heals. There's this balance in the world. And Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, "My son, you and I suffice for the whole world." Now I'm going to take a pause in the text for a second because there's an amazing thing happening here that is so relevant to the times that we're living in. What will we do when we emerge from the cave? All of us are sitting in caves right now. Of course, the caves are a little nicer. Hopefully you have more than carob tree and water to sustain you. Hopefully you've got some furniture as well, maybe some clothes. A washing machine would be great. But we're all stuck in our caves. And what are the expectations of the world around us that we're creating? Shimon and Elazar were in the cave for 12 years, studying Torah, getting into the depths of Jewish mysticism, and they thought everyone must be exactly like us. Everyone must have had this exact same experience. The entire world should be focused on the divine and feeling the divine in every moment, in every grain of sand. And they emerge from the world, and they're just people living their lives, doing regular work. How is this possible? How will all of us emerge from the caves? What's the world we're expecting to see? And what's the world we're going to find? This story ends, it actually ends quite beautifully, that as the sun was setting on Shabbat Eve, they saw an elderly man who was holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches and running at twilight. They said to him, "Why do you have these?" He said to them, "Kavod Shabbos, in honor of Shabbat." They said to him, "And let one suffice." He answered them, "One is corresponding to remember the Shabbat day, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, and one is corresponding to observe the Shabbat day, Shemor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho." Rabbi Shimon said to his son, "See how beloved the mitzvot are to Israel." Their minds were put at ease, and they were no longer as upset that people were not engaged in Torah study. We're all going to have a lot of expectations about what the world is going to look like when we emerge from the caves. The challenge on each of us is, when we emerge from the caves, will our eyes be open enough to heal rather than to burn, to be compassionate rather than to be angry? There's plenty to be angry about. Don't get me wrong. I feel the anger as well. But will we have the compassionate eyes to see the beauty that this new world has to offer? There's a whole existence out there, just beyond this cave, just beyond this month, just beyond this time period. We're going to emerge into a different world. Will we accept it with judgment, or will we accept it with love? Will we try to destroy the things that bother us, or will we try to appreciate the things that inspire us? So I love this story of Shimon Bar Yochai. I hope that it gives you a little kernel of something to take with you into your Shabbat. And I'll pass it back to Joe, who will now berate me with your and his questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Your energy is electric and just what we need in this moment. One thing that struck me in this text, which I'd love you to talk about, is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't go into this cave necessarily willingly, or it's not his ideal scenario. He's going in from this place of fear, and it feels very human. It feels very, very current, and this fear, even though it wasn't his choice, it seems to have affected him going into that cave. So why is this story rooted in that idea of fear? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's an amazing point. It's another level of like the connection to what we're going through now. We're all in our homes because of fear of what we might do, what this virus might do to us, to those we love, to the world around us. We're in here because of fear. And when we choose to isolate ourselves, no one goes like, there's a big difference to choosing to go on a 90-day silent meditation retreat. I know someone who did that. I don't understand it, versus being forced to be quarantined in your home for 90 days. There's a big difference between doing something because like, oh, this is what I want to do versus like, this is what I have to do. I'll also say like, the first week of quarantine was kind of fun. Like Rebecca and I went from being crazy busy to like, wow, we have all this time. Like, let's catch up on all the stuff we missed and yada, yada, yada. And like, there's almost this rhythm to the quarantine that I think beautifully we're all experiencing together, which is it's great and then it's terrible and then it's great and then it's terrible and it's great and then it's terrible. And it's because it's not our choice. It's because we're forced to be there. I think the fear is palpable and the fear causes us to be angry. I think there are a lot of people who are angry for a lot of reasons right now. And they're responding with this anger in different ways. Some people are angry at their governments. Some people are angry at other groups of people for being angry at their governments. There's a lot of different emotions out there. And I think we have to acknowledge our fear and face our fear and accept our fear, because there's really not much else we can do. All we can change is how we're going to perceive the world. We can't change how the world is functioning.
Thank you. I want to just let everybody know that we're taking questions on our Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. So if you have anything to say or even a comment about how you feel about this text, then please do share it. I want to ask you about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, about his personality. About yes, we can liken him to how we are, but he doesn't feel like he necessarily was the least judgmental person that one has met in life, shall we say, to give him some respect. But he made a choice in that fear, and we don't have a choice whether in our fear to kind of go back to to leave our homes. But he did have a choice to kind of bear the consequences for what he said, the Lashon Hara, essentially what he said about the Roman government. I wonder what there is to say here about how Rabbi Shimon Yochai's retreating affected the people around him that he was hoping to teach Torah to. It seems like an irresponsible leadership decision.
It's a wonderful question. I think it's also important to think about the historical context, which is all three of these rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Yossi, are three of the like 5 to 7 rabbis who are the leaders of the rabbinical world post Bar Kokhba revolt. So in 132 to 135 CE, there was this revolt led by Shimon Bar Kuzba, who was also called Shimon Bar Kokhba, son of the stars. Messianic fervor was abound amongst the Israelites, and all the rabbis are killed, except for like 7. All the rabbis are killed by the Romans, and they're the only ones left. They're the ones picking up the pieces. And I think all three of these rabbis are really responding in very typified ways of how people can respond to absolute tragedy. I think Rabbi Yehuda is like, man, it's so much better now than it used to be. You know, they look at the past and they're like, oh, that was so terrible, but now look at how great we have it. And some people are silent and they're unable to really grapple with any of their emotions. You know, they're just trying to go through the day-to-day. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is angry. The truth is he entered the cave angry. He entered the cave angry. And a lot of us entered our cave angry. A lot of us were already unhappy with the state of the world when we went into the cave. The natural thing would be for us to emerge even angrier. Shimon Bar Yochai was mad. He was mad that there were no other rabbis. He was mad that people weren't only engaged in Torah study. And actually, one of the amazing things is, after this story, he changes. Eventually, he's going to change. And these marketplaces and currencies and bathhouses that he's criticizing in the beginning, later on in the story, he actually engages in their improvement. And we actually learn that Yaakov Avinu himself was engaged in the improvement of these things. I think we can use this period, this quarantine, this self-isolation, to compound the things we're already feeling. And I think we can use it to move through the things we're already feeling, to work through the things we're already feeling. I can emerge from this with all my negative qualities totally accentuated, or I can emerge with this being like, wow, I really spent the time to like work through all my like messed up bleep that's going on in my head. We have that choice to a certain extent. And obviously that's acknowledging that like people have varying degrees of difficulties and emotional distress that they're experiencing right now. And I'm mostly speaking from an I perspective, not from a collective perspective. But what are the things that you can work through right now? And are you putting in that work?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful to see a text that shows that, you know, yes, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is angry, but in some ways that's a trauma response. And look at this range of trauma responses in these rabbis. And I think what's lovely for the audience to see is that we don't often get an insight into the rabbis as human beings who have feelings. And I think that the fact that the Talmud is sharing this piece of text is quite unexpected from my point of view, to see into the emotional lives of these figures that we look up to. I've got a question from our audience. What do you feel is the significance of Yehuda, the person who's not Rabbi Yehuda, the Yehuda and the son of converts? Why is he meant? Why did it mention he's the son of converts? Is it merely a practical detail that shows, oh, he'll have a wider circle to influence, or was there something about his view being important here?
So I think there are three ways of which to read the story. I'll also say, like, as the story continues, he dies. He's sort of burned up by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's not a nice ending to the story. I know, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. But I don't sugarcoat the text. The text is what the text is. So I think there are three ways to look at it. I'll first say the way I prefer to look at it, which is they're calling him Yehuda ben Gerim to distinguish him from Rebbe Yehuda. Like, there are two Yehudas in this story, and if one was Rebbe Yehuda and one was just Yehuda, it would be complicated. Like, just in terms from a purely narrative, literary perspective. I think you can look at it as there's definitely a way, the least likely way that I think it can be read, which is still possible, is like, oh, there's something wrong with converts. Like, that's why he did this. But I actually don't think that makes sense. I think that would be wildly inconsistent with like the Talmud's approach to converts in general. I think there's a third way, which is not the way I read it. Again, I read it as just a literary marker. I think there's a third way, which also makes some semblance of sense, which is they're saying he's Ben Gerim because when he went to go tell his household, he was telling it to both Jews and non-Jews, perhaps. And that perhaps is how the news spread all the way to the Roman government. I think that's possible. I don't think that's the correct read of the story. I think it's just like a way of marking his distinction. That being said, he is killed in the end, so maybe that is the more correct way, and I'm just resistant to it because it makes me uncomfortable given my own value set. Yeah, but great question.
Likewise, yeah. Great, thank you. And one from me. What this moment where they come out of the cave 12 months, the second time they go into this cave, after they get a voice to tell them to go back in. Rabbi Shimon is the one that heals. He seems to have kind of done his repentance. He's grown in that experience. But Rabbi Elazar is still hurting people. He goes, he's hitting people. What does this mean? Like, why is it just showing that Rabbi Elazar has not improved, or is it this hitting something else that we're missing here?
No, I think it's that he's not improved. I think this is about actually. I can teach this text in 17 different ways. We're talking right now about social isolation. This is also a text about generational trauma, and how we pass it down. Like Shimon Bar Yochai experienced a terrible trauma of like living through the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then he passes it on to his son by forcing him to live in a cave for 12 years during his formative years. And then his son is angrier. Like I have no actual evidence to back this up, but I suppose that the age with which someone survived the Shoah deeply affected how they approached it, and how they maybe perhaps dealt with it later on. Also, like geographical stuff and their personal experience obviously affected that as well. But like, I think he was just super traumatized from living in a cave for most of his life. That's how I read that story. I think it's also possible to be read at like we are often in our chavrutas looking for that balance. I burn, you heal. You burn, I heal. You tear down the text, I build it up. But the best chavruta I have, he and I are constantly switching roles with like who thinks this text is lying to us and who thinks this text comes directly from God. And like we're constantly switching off those roles, and it makes for powerful learning.
Wow, that's really insightful, and I appreciate that kind of that way of looking at it in two ways. One that supports a healthy chavruta, and also one that speaks of this trauma, which again I think just as a deeper insight into the emotional chemistry of the people here, and I think is very different to what people think the Talmud is, which is often a legal document. This is a document of so many living truths that we can learn from. I'm going to throw out a last question on this text, and it's about the ending. That kind of beautiful moment of this stranger carrying myrtle branches. What are these myrtle branches? Are they flowers for Shabbat? Was there a tradition of these myrtle branches? But why do you think this Shamor v'Zachor, the Shabbat, was mentioned in this context? What happened to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in this moment to make him think, oh, actually, people doing things outside of the Beit Midrash is a great idea?
Yeah, I think it's this moment where, first off, what he's doing is an interesting question. He's like I think it's for a fire of some sort. Mm-hmm. That seems to me what he's coming to do. And I'll actually say later on, and in Maimonides, when Maimonides talks about, when the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah, talks about lighting Shabbat candles, he brings up the idea of one candle being for Shamor and one being for Zachor. That's not in the Talmud itself. That's a later idea that I think is influenced by this story of like when we light the Shabbat candles, one being for Shamor, one being for Zachor. I think what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is seeing is that like there's holiness in the living, not just in the text. Like it's not just about suffering and surviving on carob trees and water. There's a holiness in living. Like, okay, there's like the people who, Rabbi Michael Paley, who's a previous guest on this podcast, I believe, he has a line that is, Judaism is the one religion where it's not bad to be rich. And I actually think like material things are not bad in Judaism. It's what you do with the material things that determines whether it's good or bad, which is actually what this whole story is about. A marketplace isn't necessarily a bad thing. A bathhouse isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do with it. And suddenly in this moment, Shimon Bar Yochai is like, oh, they're not bad for working the land. Look at what they're doing with it. Look at how they're integrating their lives and their Torah. And I think that's actually an awakening for Shimon Bar Yochai because it's not something he's ever been able to do. He's an extremist. He's like, you got to learn Torah all day. That's the only way. And he's looking at these people, they're not learning Torah all day. Something's wrong with them. He's like, oh, actually, their Torah is deeper than mine because they're able to integrate it into their life in a way where I have to build a silo or a cave around myself in order to do it.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Kind of insight into him. I think that we'll end here. What's really beautiful about this text for us and for me is the fact that we're going to have to be dealing with this. We're going to have to be dealing with this transition out of the cave and balancing that feeling of Rabbi Shimon saying to his son, the two of us, we're enough, and also balancing the fact that maybe when we leave, we need to think about how we relate to other people and bring what we've learned in this cave out there. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jeremy Borovitz, for sharing this piece of text with us and your wisdom and energy. I really, really appreciate your voice on this, and I hope, I think our audience can attest to that.
Thank you for having me. I'll make a quick plug for my own podcast, which is called Torah Curious, which can be found wherever podcasts are found. And I interview really interesting Jews living in Berlin, and then they teach me a bit of Torah. So please check us out wherever your podcasts are found. That's Torah Curious.
Amazing. We're so glad that you can share that. And please, everyone, listen. Also, check out future JW3 events. There's exciting news next week about future events that we'll be running over the next few weeks. But really, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you, our audience, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Just gonna